He didn't just make that phrase up. It was not original with him. Okay? It had been around for a long time, and it was a very dangerous idea. And this is why, that even in his hometown, Jesus winds up on a cliff. This is why he winds up on a cliff, threatened with summary execution. It was the idea that got him killed, as a matter of fact. In that day, when the Israelites heard the phrase, kingdom of God, they didn't think of a place where human beings go after they die. Okay? They understood the kingdom of God to mean that a day would come when Israel's God would finally come with power, and when Israel would finally be set free. A descendant of David would sit once again on the throne in Jerusalem. The temple would be rebuilt and restored, and all the nations would look up to Israel in admiration and in envy and in awe. And the Jews had been waiting a long time for that kingdom. A long time. And they were living in another kingdom. It was the kingdom of Rome. See, they've been living more specifically in the kingdom of Caesar. The Romans said that Caesar was divine. And there were slogans that were current in Jesus' day. Slogans like, there is no other name under heaven by which men can be saved than Caesar. Does that sound a little familiar? How about this one? Caesar is Lord. Kurios, Master. You ever heard anything like that before? A Roman coin had a graven image of him, of Caesar, on it, because it was to be worshipped. Because he was to be worshipped. It was part of the cult of Caesar. That's where the economic power and the religious power and the political power were all woven together. It's the kingdom of Caesar. A devout rabbi in Jesus' day, a devout rabbi would not carry one of those coins because it had a graven image on it. So they had very strict rules about graven images. And so those coins also had an inscription on them that said, Divi Filios. In other words, that Caesar is the divine son. Caesar is the Son of God. And the Israelites looked at this and they said, well, where is the kingdom? Where's that kingdom that Isaiah talks about? Where's the kingdom that the prophets talked about? And Herod, who's the Roman appointed ruler of that land, took the prerogative of even naming who the high priest would be of Israel. Throughout Israel's history, they had always come from a legitimate family, handed down generation after generation after generation. But Herod would name the high priest from among groups of people who would collaborate with him and with Rome, you see. And he took the sacred vestments that were worn by the chief priests as they entered into the Holy of Holies in the temple year after year, and he locked them up in his fortress, the fortress Antonia. And the Jews had to come to him and ask for the vestments once a year when it was time to enter the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement. It was humiliating to them. So the Israelites asked, where's the kingdom and how is it going to come? What you need to understand is this. This was the question in Jesus' day. It was the question. When is the kingdom coming? How is it going to get here? Anyone in Jesus' position, any rabbi had to address this question. And in his day, there were three basic responses to that question. And they came from three different groups of people. And these three groups of people with three different solutions for bringing the kingdom into the present reality. The first group of people, or what I'll call that first group of people, were called the Zealots. Zealots believed that the kingdom of God would come to Israel when there were enough people who would get angry enough to revolt against Rome. They chose the way of attack. This was an extreme nationalist party. They were politically radical. They were dedicated to bringing in the kingdom of God by overthrowing the Roman authority. They would use any means necessary, including violence. Some of them were assassins. They were freedom fighters or terrorists, depending on your political view. If you want to know how Rome felt about zealots, think about how you would feel when you hear the phrase Al-Qaeda, and you get a pretty good idea of how the Romans responded to the zealots. Do you think Jesus knew any zealots? This is where it starts to get a little interesting. And the New Testament opens up in some unexpected ways. You look in Luke chapter 6. Turn to Luke chapter 6. And look at verse 13 with me. Beginning with verse 13, Luke writes this. He says, "And when day came, he," this is Jesus, "called his disciples to him, and chose 12 of them, whom he also named as apostles. Simon, whom he also named Peter, Andrew his brother, and James and John, and Philip and Bartholomew, and Matthew and Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, and Simon, who was called the Zealot." How do you think the Romans felt when they heard that Jesus had called a zealot to be one of his disciples? Why do you think he would do that? These are radical political extremists who dedicate their lives to overthrowing the system, the establishment, by any means possible. Now, there was a second group that we need to know if we want to understand Jesus' day. And these folks were called the Essenes. The word doesn't even appear in the New Testament. But we know a lot about these people because of the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Have you all heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls? They were discovered near what body of water? Very good, the Dead Sea, right? And the Essenes were part of what we know as the Qumran community. And they decided that the kingdom of God would come when a group of people had withdrawn from society, and because society had become so corrupt. Not only was Rome corrupt, but the temple system, due to its compromise with Rome, had also become corrupt. It wasn't any good anymore. So they didn't even recognize the high priest because he had been made high priest by a worldly authority rather than by God's authority. And so the sacrificial system of the temple was no good anymore, they said. And they believed that the kingdom of God would come when a group of people had withdrawn and had become pure. Okay? Once they were pure enough, God would respond to that purity and would bring his kingdom back to earth in power. So they slept in caves, and they were so austere that they refused to even relieve themselves on the Sabbath. Okay? Because they were so afraid they might desecrate the Sabbath. Talk about austerity. I bet they had to train for that. They were so committed to purity that they would take a ritual bath before every meal. Now, if you know that part of the world, you know that bringing fresh water for bathing before meals was a lot of work. And they called themselves the sons of light. And they believed that when they were pure enough, God would come and burn up the sons of darkness, which was pretty much everybody else. The Pharisees were a fairly diverse group, so you can't fit them neatly into any one category, but most of them were probably as close to the Essenes as any. Okay? And this is a group who's going to separate themselves and live in their own little commune. They withdrew from society into their own protective, pure cocoon. Then there was a third group. This group was called the Sadducees. And they did not believe in the resurrection, the afterlife. They didn't believe in angels or spirits or any of that. They were interested in the here and the now. And the Sadducees looked at the Romans and they thought, if you can't beat them, join them. So their response to this crisis of the kingdom was to collaborate with Rome. And so they were joiners. They got along. They worked with the tax collectors. They paid allegiance to Caesar. They interact and deferred to the Roman political powers as witnessed in Herod's manipulation of the chief priests. And that's why all the positions of importance in Israel, like the high priest, the chief priest, always went to the Sadducees. They ran the temple, and the temple was big business in Jerusalem. Have you ever noticed how in every story money comes into it sooner or later? Okay? And the temple involved a lot of money. By law, every male Israelite was supposed to come to Jerusalem 3 times a year to bring a temple tax. And those pilgrims would have to pay for food and lodging and buy relics, and they'd have to send money if they couldn't come in person. It was all because of the temple that enough money came into Jerusalem to support 18,000 priests and Levites and another 20,000 of Herod's construction workers. The Sadducees were the ones who profited from all this. They ran the temple. They collaborated with the Romans. The Sadducees were about money and power. Now, if you're an Israelite, these are the 3 main ideas. If you're waiting for the kingdom of God, you have basically 3 possible responses. You can get mad, and you can hate, and you can be hostile, and you can attack. Or you can withdraw into your own little commune, try to become pure, and tell the rest of the world to basically go to hell. Or you can say, I don't think things will ever be any different, so I'm going to try to get mine while I'm here. Those were your options. And this is my point. You will never understand Jesus or the cost of following Him or what is dangerous about Him if you don't understand how much trouble His message about the kingdom of God, His understanding, His insights into the kingdom of God, how much trouble that got Him into. Not just from Rome, but from the attackers, from the withdrawers, and from the collaborators. Let me give you a for instance. In Matthew chapter 8, we're told that a centurion comes to Jesus asking for help, or at least he sends someone to Jesus asking for help. Now, this is a Roman soldier asking Jesus, a Jew, for help. And Jesus says, I'll go with you. This is Matthew chapter 8, if you care to write that down. And the centurion says, oh, no. You're a man of authority. I understand authority. You just say the word. You don't have to come to my house. You just say the word. And Jesus' jaw just drops to the ground. And he's stunned by this man's faith. And he says in Matthew chapter 8, verse 10, truly I say to you, I have not found such great faith with anyone in Israel. Now, of these 3 groups, who is going to be particularly offended by that comment? Who's going to be offended by that? Why, the zealots, right? I mean, the zealots want to kill this guy, and everybody like him. And Jesus exalts him as the paradigm of faith. Do you have any idea what this is going to do to the guts of a zealot? What is a zealot going to start thinking about Jesus for saying such a thing?